Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, back again to bring you the ranking for Discipline Covenants as it stands right now in Shadowlands Beta. So, in general, Disc has been kind of jumping around a variety of different covenants, and I wanted to kind of talk about why I'm picking the covenants that I'm picking, what has happened to the other covenants in the past, and how they've kind of changed and like what makes them good and bad, okay? So, starting it off, there's going to be a little bit of a difference if you're focusing more on raids or focusing more on M+. So, top of the list is going to be the Venthyr, alright? Starting off our list, number 1 slot, the Covenant ability Mind Games deals a nice big chunk of damage, but it also will reverse whatever your enemy is doing. So if the enemy is dealing damage to your group, it'll turn some of that damage, not all of it, but some of that damage into healing onto them instead. If the boss is trying to heal themselves, they'll start dealing damage to themselves instead. And basically what this ability has come through is over the course of testing, it just didn't really do that much damage, and even though it converted into atonement healing, it was pretty light until they massively buffed the amount of DPS that it does, the fact that it synergizes very well with Schism, like I said, converts to atonement healing, basically just makes it so the Venthyr Mind Games ability is the return of Light's Wrath. You know, you don't have the big raise your staff in the air and the big projectile flying, but the raw effect of it is basically just Light's Wrath in a nutshell. It also, whenever it reverses some of that damage and healing and everything like that I mentioned, it also returns mana to you. So it's a very high damage button that converts to atonement healing, that regens a bit of mana, and sometimes it'll actually do that Mind Games effect where if the boss tries to damage us, we get a little healing. But most of that is really secondary to how much damage it does. And this is why, for rating, it's at the number 1 spot. Right beside it, however, and the better one for M+, if you're just purely M+ focused, is the Kyrian. And there's been a ton of talk, of course, about Kyrian, about how strong they are for a very long time, because the Ascended, whenever you activate the ability, you get 2 buttons. You got the Ascended Blast, which replaces Smite, and of course, converts to Atonement Healing. And you have the Ascended Nova, which replaces the cooldown of it. You know, so whenever you use Boon of the Ascended, that Boon of the Ascended button turns into a spammable Ascended Nova. So you basically cast 1 blast, cast 2 novas, back and forth, until the very end where you have a large detonation that goes out. So what really started pushing the Ascended Eruption into prominence was not only the fact that it was easy to use, it could really stand at it as its own cooldown, which is really efficient for the fact that you need to save mana, you need to be conservative with mana, especially from a raid perspective early on in the expansion. And the fact that the Ascended Blast and Eruption convert into Atonement Healing. One of the changes that they did to Ascended Eruption is they changed the detonation into a square root formula where every target that it hit would convert into Atonement Healing, but it was all splitting the damage. So finding a way to make sure that Atonement would work as it reasonably should, I think. But then they changed it back so it splits damage and now only converts to Atonement off the first target that it hits for that Eruption, which makes the Kyrian just okay. Yeah, well, I'd say it still makes it very good compared to a lot of the other options. But I'd say that Venthyr for rating outpaces it because of how easy the Venthyr is able to be utilized and how much more easily you're going to be able to save resources, pair it up with an ideal ramp. It's just a simple fire and forget with minimal setup. When it comes to Soulbinds, both the Venthyr and Kyrian have good Soulbind options. The Venthyr have Nadia, which gives you a single target damage buff onto an enemy. Unfortunately, that damage doesn't convert into Atonement Healing, but instead, if you don't want to go with that route, you can also get a bit more value out of your Food and Flask. You can get a haste buff. You have a couple options at your disposal. And of course, you've got your Door of Shadows, which is the Blink ability, which has a short cast time, and you're able to just jump ahead, which Disc Priests really, really love. Going on to the Kyrian, you have your Vial, which is incredibly effective for removing a lot of bleeds. Dungeons, it really helps out a lot because you can remove curses from yourselves. You can remove a variety of debuffs that you can't get rid of ordinarily. And Soulbinds are very good as well. You have Pelagos, which gives versatility and mastery buffs. You've got Clea, which has 2 different healing effects. They've been nerfed quite a bit, but they're still pretty decent. giving you some solid options from a healing perspective. So if you're looking to focus, and if you only really care about what is the best thing for raids, go Venthyr as it stands right now. If you want to pick whatever's going to be best for M+, go Kyrian as it stands right now. If you really like one or the other, and you really like the aesthetics of one or the other, go pick it. You'll be totally fine. I think that Venthyr and the Kyrian are very close together for the content for raids and M+, and they're pretty interchangeable as well. Which brings us into, well, why not choose the other two covenants, all right? The Necrolord Covenant, Unholy Transfusion, basically just pushes out a big Nova. That Nova will heal allies, and then it applies a dot to enemies. And whenever the enemies have that dot on them, if allies attack them, they get healed kind of like at a Judgment of Light. So if you attack the enemy with a dot, you get a heal. What has happened to this ability is they capped how much atonement transfers. So if you dotted up a bunch of enemies, a whole slew of enemies, all of those dots would convert to atonement healing. Now it's just one. With the Judgment of Light effect, they've once again capped that as well. So you can't be like cleaving and AoEing enemies and getting heals from all of them. Instead, it's just kind of like one at a time. So it does a ton of damage, and they recently buffed its damage, but it really doesn't do good healing in general. The atonement conversion is like 4 or 5 perks to Wickers or something like that, which is decent. It's nice, but it's not this massive burst that is what makes Disc really strong in a raiding environment. In an M+ environment, it's big damage in an AoE situation, but so is the Kyrian ability, if you think about it. So the Necrolord ability just kind of comes up short and just kind of does some damage. When it comes to the Night Fae ability, Fae Blessings, they've changed this ability around a couple times. So now you have 3 fairies that you spawn. And whenever you cast the corresponding ability, it places the fairy onto that target. So one of them will regen you mana. What you have to do with this fairy is you have to apply Shadow or Pain or Purge the Wicked. It applies it to the enemy, and then you have to actively be damaging the enemy to regen your mana. Not always the best option there. The other 2 fairies are going to give CD reduction, and they're going to give damage reduction. Those are initially going to be placed on you from the very beginning. And the CD reduction will work with a major ability for Shadow Fiend. This ability is really not so hot because a lot of times you're going to be applying your Shadow Fiend, or Mind Bender if you take that one, with whenever you're going to have a ramp. So if you ever have to hold onto your Shadow Fiend, and you're running with a cooldown reduction covenant, then you're just effectively wasting a lot of the bonus, because that's really most of the bonus is you regen a little bit of mana, and you get a reduced CD on Shadow Fiend, and that's about it. Early on, there were some uses with the pet builds, if you're going to be playing with a Shadow Flame Prism Legendary, but that has since been nerfed a little bit, so it's just not very favorable for Disc, because a lot of its power is now in the damage buff, and that damage buff doesn't convert into atonement healing, so the pet build's just kind of meh at the moment. Night Fae, just kind of decidedly mediocre, and I don't even really like their aesthetics as well. Mobility, of course, is usually good, but you can get that, like I mentioned, out of the Venthyr Covenant much more easily with a lot better benefits for you. Now, if you want to multi-spec, if you're saying, hey, yeah, I'm like a Disc main, but I want to be able to play Shadow 50-50, or I want to play Holy 50-50. My advice for where it stands right now, if you're playing Disc and Shadow, go with Venthyr. The Venthyr ability is really easy to be able to squeeze into Shadow setup. It's just one button you press every 45 seconds. I know Shadow Priests are still figuring out what's best, but just from a how things interact perspective, if Venthyr and Kyrian are at the top of the list for Disc, running the Kyrian ability is like immensely disruptive to Shadow's rotation and just like starts really messing with what they have already going on. Whereas Venthyr, boom, simple, fire, forget, you're well on your way. If you want to play Disc and Holy, go with Kyrian. The Holy, working with Holy Priest for the Kyrian ability, the Ascended Blast will put out Echo of Light healing, and it's just pretty easy to be able to set up, use it as its own cooldown, weave in whenever you really need to, and Holy's already that big cooldown healer. So, if you're playing Disc and Shadow 50-50, go Venthyr. If you're playing Disc and Holy 50-50, go Kyrian. If you're focusing on one or the other, make sure that that's going to be your priority. If you're playing Holy and Shadow, I don't really know if I have a perfect answer for you on that one. You might have to be making a tough call. Multi-specking might be might be a pain, but I think that if you're playing Disc and one of the other specs, you shouldn't have too terrible of a decision ahead of you. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll be sure, again, to keep you guys updated as we get closer and closer to the expansion. Expect, when you're looking at just before the expansion comes out, or just as release is coming out, I'll have my WoW head guides, and I'll have a specific video guide talking about everything that you need and everything that you want to be looking for your priest before it comes out. But right now, this is my status update. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll catch y'all next time.